Councilmember Missy White. Present. Councilmember Dan Hahn.
Present.
Council President Melinda Cox.
Present.
Councilmember Julia Stubble. Let the record reflect that Councilmember Stubble is not present. Councilmember Josh Hahn. Let the record reflect that Councilmember Josh Hahn is not present at this time, although I have been informed that he may be able to join us later.
And Mayor, please.
Thank you, Council President Cox. Mayor Monty Richardson. Let the record reflect that Mayor Richardson also is not present.
Thank you. So we, Julie Stubble will be able to join us at 6. We might do a repeat roll call. Okay, and as far as a quorum goes, there is no voting matters. We are going to be moving this meeting to 569 Main Street for a tour of the facility. And then we will return after that tour is complete. We will then do another roll call in the event that both of them are able to join. If not, we will just let the record reflect whether or not we have a quorum, which is still unnecessary probably since there's no voting action items. Okay, we will adjourn to the property of Main Street.
Council President Cox, would you just note for the record that the recording, the Zoom recording will continue in chambers for our return? We're not going to stop it or pause it.
Yes, so just for the record, we will not be stopping the Zoom recording. It will continue on in chambers. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and resume the meeting. Bless you. Okay. So, two people. Okay. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and if you want to, yeah, make contact with her. Get started and we'll start with staff reports. And then I would guess that the new business with the discussion. Thank you. Okay. And just start with Hunter.
I'm open for any questions. I haven't been for quite a while, so I'm happy to brief on how building is going and construction and progress towards code compliance. And I really think we're making great strides with what town's looking like, but happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
Sorry, what's that, John? Oh, I didn't prepare any numbers or anything like that, but
What projects?
Dollar General is getting finished up here. As you can see, the Lander Motel, the Pushroom Brewing for commercial projects. There's quite a few residential projects in the Gannett Peak subdivision. A lot of remodels, a lot of roofs have been coming through. I think people are trying to get ready for winter to come. So a lot of re-roof projects happening. Some utility work happening. We did Black Hills Energy is trying to do some projects to upgrade their infrastructure as well. So utility companies are coming through us and making sure they're installing utilities in proper corridors where they're out there. Yeah, I haven't felt much pushback, and it just seems like we are kind of going where we were shooting for.
Thank you, Hunter. Lance?
Yes, thank you. Happy to answer any questions as well, but also next week or in 2 weeks, I guess, next meeting, be prepared for us to bring back through the community center agreement and talk about that one again. We realize that we're kind of having this missing stopgap between putting out a new contract and what we're doing now. So we're looking to maybe fill that in so that we have snow removal happening, coordination of meetings, and then we can get prices for an upgraded landscaping contract in the meantime. But until we have those prices for you to consider, we're probably going to reapproach that one for the fee and then see if you guys want to go with the staff recommendation or, what else we can do, because we're just short on people and staffing to take care of that property. And that contract is due in September is when that new agreement is signed. And so that means that we don't have anybody taking care of the exterior at all during that duration until we put out a new contract. So just be prepared for that one.
So I do have a question about that. Because of the timing, I can understand being short-staffed as far as Parks and Rec goes in order to maintain that property, but are we not putting out an RFP for as a result of our discussion 2 weeks ago?
We will, but that RFP is going to take some time to advertise, to get bids, and then get it back for you to assess it and see if you still want to move forward. We're also short on budget, so it's going to be a budget discussion because of, where that could potentially come in if you're willing to spend those extra dollars on landscaping. The other problem it's creating is multiple contractors in one space. So if you're going to have one doing snow removal and one doing events, who's going to coordinate, who's going to be up there when you have different things coming over the winter and how the property is going to be taken care of. So it creates additional logistical issues that, probably fit better under one umbrella rather than two. And if we want to get additional landscaping services, there's potential for us to contract those out a few times a year if we want to spend more money there, in addition to what's already being done. So if we want to spend more money on the community center or add additional budget to do more things to make it look different, that would also be our recommendation. Hey, we could bring somebody in on a contract basis, but just giving you an idea of what roughly that would cost. So you guys can assess that and make decisions.
Do you? The snow currently?
So right now, the contractor removes the snow as part of the event, and then we remove the big snow in the parking lot. With,
Oh, so like the sidewalk, the contractor currently,
yes,
but the parking lot would not be something. we would-
no,
Okay.
that's something that we take care of. And so that $100 a month is pretty cheap for covering this gap until we make a decision. So we're gonna talk to that contractor again, come back and evaluate that one again and give a better recommendation to staff. We weren't all on the same page going into that meeting as far as what we were recommending. So we'll take the blunt for that one for not giving a strong recommendation.
Chance, didn't we, go with just the maintenance on the building itself? We done away with the, like, month, yeah, so that wasn't even worth the.
The $100 a month covered some services that we need to talk about. I think that's why we were going to bring it back up. And so it was pretty minimal investment to make sure the lawn gets mowed and the snow gets removed on that investment. And then if we want to get an additional bid and then remove that from the contract in the future, have a way we can shift that in a plan to do so.
But it's not in the contract.
There were 2 contracts.
$100. We didn't even okay that.
Right,
So that's no.
correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure that I'm.
Yeah,
thinking of-
that's what got signed was the one without any
Yes,
service up there. So there's 0 service being provided
yes.
in September,
Missy.
starting September.
Thank you. I want to say, Lance, as a result of that meeting, I appreciate with you, with Hunter and with Shari having conversations to better understand what was going on and, things like expectations of wanting them to spray for weeds, like, oh, if someone's being paid to do that, they have to have all the certifications to do that. And that adds a level of complexity, for instance, I was not aware of for that and what expectations are for that, the contract as it currently stands. So I appreciate the conversations that we had about how to move forward on it.
Yeah, and we had discussions internally about hardscaping and, we have to a little bit talk about what our level of expectation is up there as well as what we have budget for and try to make those 2 things meet. We know that depreciation and, the community center does not make money. It invites people here. So we lose a lot of money up there, but it's a great event complex for us to have. So have to make some decisions about level of service of what we want that to be and what we're willing to pay for. We can move funds around. We just should have a more in-depth conversation about that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, as many businesses will have a loss leader to get folks in the door, recognizing that money will be spent in other places. And I think the community center serves in that way. We know it's not ever going to net out at 0 in any given year, but it does serve the community in so many ways. And that's a tricky thing to figure out, just how much is okay to spend on it. And then the different preferences of, me as a gardener, I hear hardscape and internally cringe, but from a maintenance standpoint, gosh, that does make things a lot easier. I understand that. So what's a reasonably cost-effective aesthetic? What's a reasonably cost-effective and appropriate way to upkeep all of that, et cetera, and, if knowing what we know now, we never would have had an exterior clad that would invite woodpeckers. Looks great, but, now we're battling woodpeckers on a regular basis. If only we'd known, live and learn.
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to make a comment to that. By what we did the other night, and I was part of it. I think we cost. I think we cost the citizens of Lander probably more than what I thought. Because we're going to end up, because we did what we did, we're going to end up paying maybe 2 different contractors, and it could cost us $500 a month. And I voted on it, but I tell you what, I understood fully what was going to happen, and I think we screwed up because that's money that could have went anywhere else, and we had it in the contract. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
So I don't think we goofed. I can see why you would think that, but we took it seriously. And the community center is a focal point, you know, for what we're bringing a lot of people out of town, and there's some areas up there of concern, and it's not something that somebody can really do a good job with. It doesn't have all the necessary items they need to perform the job. And so granted, it's in the contract and all that stuff was available for us. And I agree. I mean, I think it's going to cost the city some extra money, but at the end of the day, it's a valuable resource to maintain. And we do a pretty good job, and we've been pretty lucky overall. And so I would say that, I mean, we had a very good conversation about it. It will probably cost us a little bit more money. However, we can't have things breaking down in that capacity. And so we just have to be able to have the conversation. And I don't think anybody's at fault or any of that kind of thing. We just need to relook at it. It's not a, you know, it's something that can be revisited.
Sure. And I guess, you know, the conversation that we had as staff is that we would take all the information or what's required out of that agreement and create the RFP. If that's not sufficient, you know, we probably should have that conversation. What else do we want in here to put out for bid? But probably came down to an enforcement issue of us not enforcing that agreement to the extent it needed to be. If we're going to put out a same contract with the same language and, you know, award it for more money, you already have the opportunity or may have the opportunity to award that language for $100 a month. So that's where we wanted to revisit this, because we need to know what that says. If we're talking about a much higher level of service, you know, that's where, you know, what is our expectation of this community center? What should it look like? There are some safety issues. We're aware of tripping hazards and other issues that aren't going to be fixed by this contractor. You know, that's not what this contract is, to go put down the stones and the pavers again. That's a different project. So maybe just a little more open conversation about, you know, what's the expectation? Do we need to do a couple bigger projects around the area to make it easier to maintain, or where do we want to go with this? Because it left this gap of us not knowing as staff where to take this RFP, how far, and what we want to spend up there.
Question?
Thank you.
Yes. So do we have an idea of where the zero loss is on the community center as far as rental prices? And how far away are we from that?
I actually had given a paper because they had requested a 20-year analysis of the community center for the profit and loss of where it was at. I'm still working on my audit file. But for the 6/30/24 year, we took about the year's not completed. I'm not going to give you that number. The 23 number, we had a $38,000 loss for total year. After you get rid of the debt and the new assets that you purchased, the prior year, we had $28,000 loss. The biggest thing that it's an expense here is just the cost of running it. When your gas and utilities run you over $30,000 a year just for your electricity. The community center maintenance itself and repairs, because it is now since 2012, we put even more money into having to do repairs, and we didn't set up or anticipate having any kind of a replacement fund for it. I mean, maybe in our fee structure, we should have an amount that we put aside for long-term repairs for it. The community center itself brought in 100,000. It brings the last 3 years, the average is about $98,000 a year it brings in income, but we are overspending that, you know, enough that we, you know, are averaging about a $35,000 loss each year.
Well, you know, I guess the thing that I get kind of frustrated with is that you go anywhere else. I don't care if it's Salt Lake, if it's Denver, if it's where it's at, is that when you're looking at $900 a day for a facility like that, I mean, that's dirt cheap. And do we need to work on recouping some of that, 25 or $28,000 a year, by fee increases or, you go anywhere else and you have to pay for it. Just because we're in Lander, we think that we've gotta give it away. Am I wrong there?
I agree with you because we did raise it 5%. We have raised it every year. We're gonna hear kickback, but if you look at the turnover, the volume, we have the same customers coming back year after year. And it's holding every wedding from Riverton, they're coming over here. I think people would pay it. People who have had weddings in other places say this place is just dirt cheap.
Yeah.
I think we could raise the rates and we might get some kickback, but it would certainly stop the bleed a bit.
I think we need to look at that.
The bad thing is we allow people to book it for 3 years out. So people book that and then they've got that price for 3 years, But it's hard to plan like the one shot that has their event the same week, every single month.
Yeah,
They want
yeah.
that security being able to. So every year, as soon as that event's over, they're booking the next year. Well, that's guaranteed in that price at what we're charging that current year.
Okay.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, Sherry, can we call it feedback instead of kickback? They have very different meanings. I know what you meant, but it's like, no, we don't get kickbacks. We get feedback, admittedly, but yeah, I'm gonna agreed. I can see both sides of that coin. When a nonprofit that I'm part of was looking at event space, I thought for sure the board would say no way to the price of renting out that compared to what we'd done before for our event. And they're like, absolutely, it's worth every penny. Color me wrong. Like, okay, made arrangements for it. And it is a great facility for sure. I don't know how to quite word this right. It's not that I'm pleased that it's in the 30,000, but I did think it was a higher cost that we were losing on it every year. Because when I think about what that means for what it's bringing in for the number of hotels, meals, caterers, et cetera. I mean, that is when I put on my business hat, that's what a loss leader is. Like we take a little bit of a hit, but we know we're driving income in many, many other facets of Lander.
We do paid off Web Energy. So the debt that we had on that was a zero interest, 10-year loan. So now that's additional $10,000 that we don't have in expenses every year for that facility.
Okay, Lance, did you have anything additional to? Oh, that was fine. Thank you. Thank you for that information. I did want to talk a little bit, Lance, don't let me forget to talk to you about the ditch running through the park. I don't want to blast you now because then you have to answer, but maybe I will. So the ditch that's running through, there's no, it seems like we might have a leak somewhere within our culvert piping underneath the baseball field. Is that correct? Oh.
So this is an existing ditch, I believe. I'm not sure what the name of it is, but it runs like any other utility across our property. So, when you have people with water rights that own ditches, they operate and maintain those corridors to deliver that water to their house. This isn't something that it's not our water. It's not anything other than on our property. And that infrastructure is failing at this point in time. So I believe it's part of the Lander ditches, where they divert water out of the river there. And it's questionable whether there's water rights or not on that ditch, but that conduit that they use to move water is failing, and that culvert or piping is failing, I think more than in just one spot. So it's probably due for a full-on replacement, if not an evaluation, but it's not serving city of Lander water to residents or anything like that. It just happens to be on our parcel where it's located.
So it would be the Lander ditch's responsibility to replace that piping on our property?
The water right holders. So if there are people with a way a ditch works is if I live out of town and I'm on a ditch, if I'm not getting water or need to maintain my ditch, I need to go upstream and fix the problem. So it falls on the property owners who have a right to that water to maintain their infrastructure or make sure that they're getting water. And so whoever the downstream water right holders are, which, we're not aware of if they are people who have transferred their water rights to the city of Lander drinking water pipeline. I mean, that was an effort a long time ago, was to take the water rights within this area, move them so that everybody has drinking water, and to do as many of those water rights as possible. A lot of the ones that weren't moved were either abandoned or issues with them, but we provide water through the city of Lander pipeline through our piping and operate and maintain that as an enterprise. So if there is an enterprise or agreement, it would fall on others to maintain or operate those conduits and keep them in good working order.
So why is the ditch not running? Is that a different?
It failed. You know, at this point, it's not getting past a blockage. I think it collapsed and needs to be fixed.
Oh, okay, so there's no way for water to even get through if it would be turned on
Yeah, I think it would
the
just,
head gate.
it would come up in our Little League field is where it's coming up. So it's
Okay.
just surfacing at that point. So the piping goes from the maintenance building across City Park, underground, underneath Fremont Street, and crosses Fremont Street under a fence. And so you don't even know the infrastructure's there. But I think that's the water you're probably being asked about.
Is there a plan to repair the church?
I mean, there can be,
Okay.
you know, and so if they want to come in and talk to us about access or easements and to dig things up and put in new pipes and put them back, you know, that's something that we'd entertain. But I think also you have to be a water right holder and have access to that. That's your easement essentially, is when you're an owner of water on a ditch.
Because it's been without water a good majority of
Yeah,
the summer.
and they did ask us to replace it, and it's like, well, this isn't the city of Landers, you know, this is on our property, but it's not truly our infrastructure or our ditch or something that we use.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It was good that I brought. Okay. Do you have anything, Reggie?
Yeah, I just have one schedule update. The planning commission that you're going to hear from tonight will do a couple more presentations in September. And we'll probably have an open house in September for citizen review and of what you're seeing tonight. And then I hope to schedule the first reading on the October meeting, the ninth, I believe it is.
Thank you. Sherry?
I forgot to tell you that we did finally get our FEMA payment a couple months ago. The one that is holding us up is our AML money. They are just slow in paying. So I don't, they're short staffed in that office, or that's the one we're holding out for now is the AML money, which is a storage tank.
Thank you. Any questions about that? Nope. Okay, Anne?
It's back to school time, so please use safety as you travel about town. Watch for pedestrians, kids on bikes, crosswalks, things like that. So we've been sending out some safety reminders about that on social media. Also, we had a pretty good staff meeting with the E&E task force last week. They just presented some ideas which could potentially be cost savings opportunities for this community to explore. So those have been positive conversations, including things like the community center, what might be available through Rocky Mountain in terms of their Watt Smart program. So hopefully we can work with E&E to bring some savings to the city soon. And then even though I know it's August, it's not too soon to be thinking about Christmas. The Light Up Lander Parade we're looking at is December 7th. So we're working on the road closure kind of permits through YDOT and working with the police on finalizing that. So that information should be out and ready soon.
Thank you, Anne. Any question? Yes, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd seen the city working on the crosswalks out there by Baldwin Creek today, and I just appreciate that those get pretty worn out pretty quickly, and so it's nice to see them getting refreshed here in time for school.
Great. Rochelle?
Is still working towards selection of Parks and Rec director. It's a diverse group. Great opinions and feedbacks. There's a meeting Thursday to finalize the list, anticipating then that interviews hopefully will be held the week of September 16th. Some folks are out of town, in town, so coordinating schedules has been a bit of a struggle getting there. You may have seen some new license plates around town. Well, it's replacing license plates. So we've been doing an inventory of the city license plates, and we'll be asking the council to approve a check to Whiteout for vehicle services because we have to pay $10 per plate. And we'll be replacing all of our vehicle license plates. Anybody have any questions for me?
I actually do have a question about that. It's my understanding that if you pay because they will roll out, is there still going to be the fee? Because it's early, right? So if you wait, will there still be the additional fees?
Are you inquiring about city vehicles or just general vehicles?
Both city,
I can speak to the city vehicles. I'm not sure what they're doing for general public vehicles. The letter that I received said that they would like the information as soon as possible, no later than October. We have to have all the plates changed over by March of 25, and we are required to pay a $10 fee for each plate. Per plate. So if we have a piece of equipment that does not require a plate, we don't have to pay for it. That's my understanding, yes. No, yes, I'm sorry, I did misunderstand. 10 for gold plates, that's how it traditionally is when we ask for a new plate. And then going forward, it's generally a $2 transfer fee. So we have some plates that maybe came up with a vehicle we sold in an auction and we haven't replaced that vehicle. We got a new police cruiser in, something like that. We do a transfer and that's $2. We don't.
sounds great. Thank you, all of you, staff. And into our next item, which is new business and discussion of proposed title zoning code changes. Just a second, we do have a comment from Councilman.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment, and this was last Tuesday. I just wanted to get this out. I'm not sure what we can do. I talked to my old boss but on Baldwin Creek, where we had the accident here a few years ago. Last Tuesday, we got the joy of standing on that corner for the whole day, and there were two kids on bicycles that pulled up, and a truck pulled up, and and this guy almost hit those kids. I mean, it was super close, and I don't know what we can do. I don't know if we can get some kind of education to the schools, but just standing there all day watching that and watching, something bad's going to happen there. I mean, really. So anyway, I wanted everybody to know that we need to get something out there with the schools. I don't know if they can do anything with the kids or what, but.
Sure. I guess let me jump into that. You guys are currently paying for a study that's near coming back to the property owners in the area for recommendations. I'd be happy to share what's in that with you guys if you want to see that. That's a public document. There's anything in that document as far as recommendations from removing approaches, pedestrian detection on the lighting, some other improvements that could be made as far as timing and improvements in the intersection itself. I'm not sure what'll be implemented. We have to take those recommendations back to YDOT because it's their highway. But some of this has to do with sight distance, visibility, just any sort of recommendations of what we could do there. We know it's hard to see, the sun gets in your eyes, what are our options? So I'm happy to give that to you, give you feedback as far as what comes out of that property owner discussion. Approaches are difficult because they're granted through a license to the property owners, and to remove those, there's not really a process in Wyoming, to go back on those, but we have like 9 different approaches in a short distance around that intersection. Some of them are really difficult. Like if you're going to be coming from Baldwin Creek and then you're going to turn by the motel and go up the alley, that's across the queued parking area. Like there should only be certain right-hand turns allowed or left-hand turns and certain functional movements that should be restricted. So we've identified a lot of issues that hopefully can help in that area. There's no perfect solution, but maybe a combination of these will improve the safety among the education component. And I think that that's the scary one is these kids are coming to school for the first day today, you know, and if they're coming from a different school, do they know how the push button works? And we went over that process that this one, you have to push the button in order to get a walk, whereas a lot of our lights in town are not set up the same way. You know, if you stand there long enough, it's still going to show you the walk, but we have two smart intersections that require that. So it's fundamental that we educate those kids early and maybe we get them before they leave the other school and, you know, catch them in an orientation as well. Like you have to be there in order to get the permission to cross at that intersection and push that button. So that's really hard I mean, they're going into fourth grade, and it's a lot to.
They can't have it's too bad they couldn't have some sort of no right-hand turn, you know, until the until the crosswalk, you know, turns red. It's that's the problem there. It's that first 3 seconds, you know, and people are right there. And if you got a big truck, you know, and little kids on bikes, you can't see it. And it just, it's terrifying to watch that. It really is.
That is one of the solutions is a pedestrian only movement built into the intersection. So
Yeah.
we'll see, you know, there's formulas within traffic that YDOT uses and, you know, efficiencies, gas, these other things. And we're like, well, you're coming through our town and we just want to make sure our kids are safe. So we approach this differently than they do. And we just have to work with them to see what's doable as far as safety.
Thank you. After seeing that, I had to tell buddy.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we're ready.
Okay, I want to introduce Zach Malum, who's the chair of the planning commission, Kara Kolovich and Joe Henry. Would you guys get turn? Or you'll have to speak into the mics when you are here.
Okay. Let me know if you're good. Jean, press to start. Okay. I don't think we put any really small images in there, so you should be okay. Well, thank you, City Council members, for having us. We are the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we are here today with our Title IV recommendations. For what we'll be going through is aligning some of the city's identified priorities and how that relates to housing and some of the Title IV recommendations, assessing the need of housing in Lander, some prior studies that have been done. Then we'll finally go into our recommendations and some final takeaways. So in the 2020 Lander Master Plan, these were some of the housing related policy recommendations. Encouraging infill development, graduating densities and intensities of development from high density in the downtown area to lower density at the edges of town. Protect established neighborhood, residential neighborhoods from incompatible development. So this would look like design standards. Expand opportunities for workforce, senior, and first-time homebuyer housing. And then finally, allow small-scale, well-designed multifamily housing in more areas of the city. I do also want to note that we are of course going through the master planning process currently for the city, and housing is one of those priorities. And then it was also identified as a top priority in the 2023 strategic plan that you all prioritized.
All right, transferring into assessing the need. All of these following slides are from the Wyoming Community Development Authority, which is a state, was developed by state statute. I think Regine, you work, or you send us studies that they've done. So they're a state organization, but they are not state funded. And they created profiles for every community within land or within Wyoming. And so I'm going to be reviewing the Lander specific profile. So as you can see here, they compared 2010 versus 2021 numbers. And in population, we don't really see that much change, 3% increase in population. And you can really see in that senior population is where there was a little bit of growth. Now, I think that these numbers are probably from the US Census Bureau. So you can claim that you're a part of an area if you permanently reside there or if you identify with that place. So that might not include some temporary workers that are maybe nursing, we call it like resident nurses, traveling nurses, thank you, or people on contract that are only here and renting. As far as the housing stock, it's also stayed relatively the same. There's a -1 change in the amount of housing units available. And really, you don't see much change in single family housing versus multifamily housing and mobile housing. So stayed pretty consistent. However, the housing needs did change. So that top circle, you'll see, so this is identifying a housing burden, so the amount of income that you have that you put towards housing. So in 2010, what was that? 18% of residents paid 30 to 50% of their income towards housing, and 5% paid 50% or more towards housing. And then in 2021, that went up. So 11% of those people paying 50% or above now, so it went from 5 to 11%, so almost doubled. And what you can see down here at the bottom, owner households cost burden. So owners didn't really change, but in renters, it really did change, 37% versus 56%. Of cost burden, yep. All right, so this has a lot going on with it, but on that first column there, home value distribution. So 43% in 2010, that's that gray bar. We're in the $100,000 to $200,000 range, and that transferred, it kind of flipped. And in 2021, it went from 200,000 to 300,000. And I just want to mention that that was in 2021, and that little dot, this is from Zillow. That red dot is where prices were in 2021. So it's only grown since then. And then similarly with rent distribution in 2021, 24% of the population was paying $350 to $500. And now our biggest population in 2021 went down to, or went up, I guess, to $1,000 to $100 or $1,500. So we're seeing rents also go up. Some of the prior studies that have been done. So last year, Harvard did a housing in Wyoming constraints and solutions study, and they focused on specific communities within Wyoming, and it analyzed the housing situation. So availability of housing, how that's impacting workforce. So it was a study statewide. And then also in 2020, the Wyoming Business Alliance paid this Cascadia Partners and community builders consulting firms to do a study of zoning codes and aligning that to Wyoming housing goals. And then the city of Lander hired those same consultants to do a Lander code audit. So that's going to be some of what we're going to pull from now, is that Lander specific code audit and what they saw opportunities were for Lander. Yes. Lander was not. But it did not analyze Lander.
Should turn on my mic. They did come to Lander and speak to a number of business owners and folks in the city, myself included, chamber, et cetera. But in their recommendations, they focused on Riverton, which is one of my concerns to them is it's a very different housing market than Lander, 24 miles apart, but our real estate challenges are very different. So.
Any other question? Okay. All right, so from that Lander code audit, these were some of the recommendations. Allow accessory dwelling units in all zones. Allow homes on smaller lots in some zones. Allow cottage cluster housing in some zones. So that's those planned unit developments. Provide opportunities for a wider range of housing types in some zones. Apply building form standards to ensure new housing is compatible with existing housing. And finally, provide flexibility for accommodating parking with new housing. So as we go through some of our recommendations, we'll tie back to how we're addressing some of these, and we didn't address all of them, right? Some of these are going to be for future planning and zoning commission topics and discussion, but accessory dwelling units we touch on, and providing opportunities for a wider range of housing types are some of the ones that we address. And quick definition of concepts before I hand it over to Zach. So accessory dwelling units, they can look like many different things. They can look like a basement conversion. They can look like a converted garage in the back. They can look like a detached mother-in-law suite. They can look like an attached portion of the house. So you won't even know the difference. It's just part of that extension of the house. And then also going back to those design concepts. So both of these images represent fourplexes, but they are vastly different, obviously. So there's no design standard or guidelines that we have at the city. So not saying that one is better than the other. They're just, you can get any type of developer design in a community. And then also you're going to, the lot constraint is going to impact the building that you're going to be able to put on a lot. Like if you have a smaller lot, you're not going to be able to fit this larger fourplex on the right, but you might be able to fit a more condensed and higher version that's on the left. So just wanted to identify those. And with that, I'll give it off to Zach.
Thank you, Kara. So what you see here is essentially a checklist of proposed changes and how those would apply to the different zones in Lander. So for example, reducing lot widths for smaller lots, we are proposing changes in every one where there is an X. So R2, R3, R5, R-Med, and commercial. We didn't suggest a change in ag or R1. And I'm not going to belabor you with reading off each and every one of those. But I think what's important is looking at the very left column that describes the changes that we're recommending and seeing what it is that we're actually doing. So reducing the number of off-street parking spaces to 1 per dwelling unit, that is something that we did with an eye to trying to create more buildable, or I guess provide more buildable area for a potential developer in the event that they wanted to have a certain number of units, but they couldn't accommodate that with a necessary amount of off-street parking pursuant to our code. I would point out that presently our off-street parking requirements are rather difficult to assess because they require figuring out percentages per bedroom rather than just a single number per dwelling unit. In any event, we did recommend increasing the maximum height of structures, increasing the number of residential structures in certain zones, removing the minimum lot coverage requirements in the zones that had them. We did recommend restricting accessory structures in some ways, basically putting height limits on them and things like that. And allowing RV campgrounds by permit only in ag, which seemed appropriate based on, first of all, how little ag zoning there actually is, and the type of use that is presently in the agricultural zones that exist. Having had a moment to look at that table, does anybody have any specific questions on what's there? Chairman Hahn or Councilmember Hahn?
I was, just a question, you may know it, somebody may know it in the room, but how tall is a standard fourplex? 30 feet tall?
I don't know if you
It-
could say what a standard fourplex might be. I mean, there's, as Kara pointed out, there's a whole bunch of different ways to build a fourplex. You can build them one right next to each other. You could build one on top of another. But basically, if you were to have a fourplex with one dwelling unit on each floor, that would be a 4-story structure, which would be 40 feet with a flat roof. And since you'd probably have to have an elevator in that particular structure, since it's 4 stories, then you'd have to add enough space for that elevator shaft. However, you could, of course, have a fourplex where there's one on, 2 stories with one on each side.
Yeah.
You could potentially have a fourplex where there's like a garden level dwelling unit, for example, one that I used to live in on the corner of Poposia and South Second, where there's 2 floors, but one is set below grade a little bit. So there's a number of ways that it could be done, but basically the max that you're looking at is 45, 40 feet, 45 feet, something like that, depending on how the elevator shaft goes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? So this is a current zoning map of Lander. One thing that we did not do is we did not actually change the outlines of any of those zones. That's not something that we have the authority to do on our own. Generally, landowners have to come to us with requests for zoning area changes, and then we consider whether or not we want to recommend approval of that to the city council. But if you look here, you'll see, of course, commercials generally, and I'm going to oversimplify for sake of trying to explain, but commercial, which is your dark blue, is kind of right along Main Street, a couple blocks over. Then there's a tiny narrow band of R5 around that. Then there's R3 and R2 out beyond. The general scheme of most cities, how they lay out their zoning maps, and I think what Lander did back when it adopted one was to have a generally gradual, making it less dense as you move from the middle. I think what they tried to do in addition to that was to accommodate the present uses that were there when they superimposed this zoning map on a city that had never had one before. And so that's why lines aren't quite even. That's why you have a couple of odd pockets of certain zones where they probably shouldn't have been if you were going to design a city with a zoning scheme from scratch. But that's generally what it looks like. And hopefully that gives you a sense of how our proposed changes will apply to different areas of the town.
I'm struggling here to see a difference between R3 and ag land. Is there any specific areas there that that you see ag land that
You're right, it is hard to point out. So I would direct you, if you're looking at your screen, to the left side of the zoning map, basically by, I guess, yeah, by Indian Lookout. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you, Kara. And then there's another one on the extreme other side of town over there, by the Blue Ridge Apartments.
Okay, and what's that? What's the hash part of that?
The hashed part of that is vacant lots, or no, unincorporated, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, it is vacant lots.
Okay,
Thank you, Regine.
all right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so this is a simplified breakdown of the proposed zoning changes for R1 in particular. And so you'll notice that the changes aren't particularly drastic. Most of them have to do with adjusting the setback lines for front, rear, and side setbacks. And we reduced those essentially in accordance with what's required in the International Building Code, which the city's already adopted. We also recommended increasing the proposed height allowance. And there is a good reason for that, actually. There's a number of structures in R1 that are quite a bit higher than 35 feet. Our concern is that we didn't want to necessarily raise the maximum allowance to, say, the biggest building in that particular zone, because then it could create the opportunity for somebody to build, a 50-foot resident house next to a single level house. And that could look a little peculiar if it were to be done on a number of lots. Not that it necessarily would, but we wanted to essentially strike a balance between what actually exists and what we have now, with an eye to trying to create, more opportunities for developers to create larger structures. And again, R1, you're always only going to have one single family residence, at least as we've proposed it. So it's not like you're going to have multiple dwelling units in an R1.
Say we do have ADUs in.
There are some that exist.
Pre-existing
Yeah.
maintenance. No, you can't.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Thank you. And to direct you to where R1 is, thank you. That's mostly here, some here, some here, and some here. The R2 zone, I think this was one of the most glaring changes when we first began looking at the code. Presently, there's no limit to the number of dwelling units that you could build in an R2 zone. Of course, those would all have to be done within a single structure, which it would be difficult to put more than, say, 4 or maybe 6 if you had many lots of space that you combine and build one large building over it. But it was odd that there was no limit to the number of dwelling units that you could have in R2 when there are limits in R3 and limits in R5 as well. So what we proposed to try to strike a balance between that, with an eye to making graduated densities between the zones, we proposed having a maximum of 4 dwelling units on an R2 lot. And rather than have one residential structure only be allowed, we proposed allowing 2 residential structures. And to kind of go back to what those definitions are, a residential structure, you can think of it as 2 buildings, each having its own separate roof. So you could potentially have 2 separate structures with 2 dwelling units in each structure. We also proposed raising the allowable height of a residential structure from 30 feet to 45 feet. And there were a number of reasons for that. One of our considerations was that of design. Apparently, there's a trend for having steeper pitches of roofs, and it seemed useful to us to try to accommodate that building. I should also note that we did recommend adjusting the setbacks as we did in pretty much all of the zones. The biggest change that you'll notice is on the rear setbacks, and I think that takes some additional explanation. If you have a lot that abuts to an alley in the rear, we're proposing that you could build your house within 5 feet of that alley. However, if there's no alley that directly abuts the back of your lot line, we're proposing that the rear setback be, I believe, 20 feet. Oh, sorry, 15 feet. I misspoke. So the reason for having that difference is you don't want to have two neighbors building their house, 10 feet apart, back door to back door. That would be just kind of peculiar from a design consideration. So you'll see that that's, as Kara pointed out more specifically in this highlighted portion. And again, R2, I think the most residential units in the city, but it's basically here and some here. Sorry. In R3, we proposed having a maximum of 3 residential structures with a total of 6 dwelling units rather than what's presently allowed of 4 dwelling units in 2 residential structures. Also, we proposed raising the height from 30 to 45 feet to help accommodate additional dwelling units and raising the proposed height of accessory structures as we did in R2 from 20 feet to 30 feet. Again, the same concept of, the difference in setbacks would apply in R3 as in R2, 5 feet from an alley, 15 from, or rather, I believe that's, yes, 15 without an alley. Point out R3, it's a little bit more fragmented than some of the other zones, but there's a portion here around Gannett Peak Elementary, another tiny little portion up here. The biggest area of R3 is concentrated over here on the very north side of town. For R5, I guess I misspoke before. Currently, there is no limit on the number of residential units that you can have in an R5 zone. We're proposing that remain the same. We are also proposing that the number of residential structures not be specifically limited. And when we say that we don't want to have a limit on the number of residential structures, one thing to point out is that your biggest limitation in any buildable lot is going to be your setbacks, because that will govern how much land you can actually build in that particular lot. So this is just what we kind of refer to as a standard city lot, even though there probably is no such thing. It's a lot with 50 feet of street frontage and 150 feet. Now, if you were to build an unlimited number of dwelling units, you obviously would be certainly limited by the minimum buildable area by the International Building Code, setbacks between the units, utility easements that would have to be run between each dwelling unit, or rather each residential structure. And so even though it sounds pretty scary that there's going to be no limit on the number of buildings that you can have in a particular lot in an R5 zone, the reality is that there's a number of limits, not all of which are specifically legislated by our proposed changes to the zoning code itself. Much of this would be governed by the limits of the size of the lot, International Building Code, etc.
Can I step in? Doug, thank you for noting that. That was something I wanted to point out, that exactly what you said. It can lead folks to think, oh my gosh, on, my across the street from me, if there were an empty lot, that's a standard, what we think of as a standard 50-foot wide, 100-foot deep, that it could be, 7 units or something. It's like, no, there are constraints based on the needed size of the lodging, off-street parking requirements, setbacks, et cetera. So what we're talking about per lot, our lots are all different in Lander. Some are that 50 by 150, some are double that width, some are 1.5 that. So that we're, I want to make sure folks are understanding that we're not saying all of these proposed amounts can fit on any lot in town. It still has to be applied to the various things that you've mentioned. So, and I think that's one that has the potential to trip up folks. We've been swimming in this world for the last way too long, 18 months or so. But folks new to it need to understand that there will still be limits based on the functional space and the other requirements for it.
Thank you, Missy. Dan?
To add to that, I think I heard you, but I wanted to pass this by you. If this zoning passes, if we go all the way to the end and it passes, you were saying that each construction project comes back to you and you take a look at it and determine whether it's fit for the, continuity of the area or whatever. Is that the truth, or is, if this passes, somebody has a piece of land, they can just come in, get a building permit and build it?
So we don't necessarily see every single development project that that might come into the city of Lander, where the Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment come in to review certain things. Well, the Planning Commission has one thing that it looks at, and the Board of Adjustment has another, though of course we're just one body, so we look at all those things at the same time. Planning Commission would look at things like if somebody's trying to combine lots or change lot lines or reorient how a lot's gonna go, like where the front entrance is going to be, where there used to be a side entrance, for example. That's something that we would have to look at as the Planning Commission. For the Board of Adjustment, if they were seeking like a variance or a conditional use permit, although those are very different things, we would then get to analyze that. But if somebody had a lot that they weren't necessarily making any changes to, there weren't going to be any real questionable setbacks or anything like that, then more than likely that would just go through the building department. And it might not even come to our attention.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do just want to mention one thing too. You mentioned the continuity of the neighborhood, and like I mentioned before, since we don't have design standards, if that's what you're talking about, like making sure that the development looks like the other ones around it, we don't have any say in that because we don't have design standards. But as far as the built template that developers can play with it, that's going to be consistent.
Yeah, some of the comments that I've heard are, if they come in and build a 45-foot structure right next to, a little house here, not only does it look out of place, but people, their privacy, those kind of things. That's what I was wondering about, or what different people are talking about. Because there's quite a few, there's quite a few properties that this right here could fit on. There's a lot of things that they could do with this. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Again, R5 is a pretty small area. It might even be, I probably should actually look at the numbers before I make representations like this, but it's one of the smaller zones in terms of actual land area in the city. And it's already concentrated around commercial development. And so that's one of the reasons why we think that that kind of development is more appropriate in that zone rather than in, say, R1. RMed. Now, this is Lander's special zoning outlier. Originally, RMed was, I guess the intent of it was to help put like clinics or other such things up closer to the hospital. The way it's actually been developed is more akin to the R2 zone. And so taking that into account, mainly what is actually there, we're currently recommending no limit to the number of units, which is what our current code says. Part of the reason for that is you have Showboat up there, which has a lot of dwelling units in it. And we wouldn't want to necessarily jeopardize the existence of Showboat if something were to happen to it. We did recommend changing the maximum height of the residential structures, which is something that we've been trying to do consistently throughout the zones that we've looked at, as well as the height of the accessory structures. And again, I'll direct your attention to the changes in setbacks that we're also proposing. You want to do it or you want me to do it? Okay, that seems.
Okay. So overall, we know that this isn't going to solve Lander's housing problems, but it's a first step, starting the conversation. So we hope you'll go with us on this journey. Some points of discussion, bringing it back to those master plan housing goals, encouraging infill development, graduated densities and intensities of development. As you could see from our recommendations, we did take that graduated approach through each zone. Protect established residential neighborhoods from incompatible development, expand opportunities for workforce, senior and first-time homebuyer housing, and small-scale, well-designed, multifamily housing. And then just kind of what we want to consider in the future, allow homes on smaller unit lots in some zones, revise the plan unit development section of the code, apply building form standards to ensure new housing is compatible, and provide flexibility for accommodating parking with new housing. So those are some of the code audit recommendations from that study that was done in 2020. So in the future, those are some things that we can consider. So just wanted to bring it back to some of the plans and studies. Yeah, so that's kind of the design standard that I've been talking about. So sometimes communities want a certain feel for developments in their community. So, you might want some get very specific. Zach, I know you said you grew up in a community that had design standards, and they may go down to like the pitch of the roofs or like the colors that you can have your houses. Those are very specific, but what you can do is like go into a neighborhood and say, generally, houses feel like this. Houses are built in this way. How do we want to either replicate that or embody it in the design features of future houses that can be built there? Yeah, that was again just one of the recommendations that the study made. Yes.
So John, one example for that would be much of Lander has alleyways. So garages are off the alley as opposed to the front of the house. That's one of those designed, it could be considered as a design standard so that the street facing looks primarily residential. And then the business side is off the alley. So that might be one that's a little more pertinent to Lander. I don't foresee us ever getting to the housing color or anything like that. I think we'd have a mutiny on our hands if we tried to do something like that. But that's often one of those kinds of things. And Regine has.
If I may. So the senior housing behind the senior center, that has design standards. You have to have a certain color of roof. And if you replace it, you have to have a certain color of roof. Right. So that's one place that's an extreme design standard. Jackson Hole has design standards. If you want to build a Kmart in Jackson Hole, it has to look like the wood of everything else in Jackson Hole. So those are the extreme design standards. Currently, the only design standard in our code is the height of the building and the width of the building as restricted by the setbacks. So right now we're at the other end of the spectrum.
And not to confuse that with aesthetics, because that's one that often comes up for folks. We don't have any kind of regulations about aesthetics. So if someone wanted to build a very modern building, like lots of glass and steel beams or something in a neighborhood, they certainly have the right to do that as long as they're meeting building codes. But that's different from design standards, not to be confused with.
Are any other questions, comments? Yes.
I would say thank you. Again, this is, I mean, I've had the pleasure of working with y'all for the last chunk of time. And I really appreciate that what you're doing. I think again, it's often misconstrued that somehow y'all are pulling these ideas out of thin air. And really what you're doing is the marching orders were established in the 2012 master plan. And that's what you're trying to figure out for us to move towards those stated goals. I really appreciate having been part of your conversations, the thoughtfulness and diligence that you've approached this and the rigorous debates about it have really been inspiring to see. And I appreciate all of your work for that. I think for us, something to be aware of as we move forward in these housing conversations, a few things. So I was listened in on WCDA's housing forum, statewide housing forum today. Statewide, it's estimated we need as many as 38,000 additional units by 2030 to address our workforce needs, which is pretty staggering. We're not the only community in this challenge of finding appropriate housing. Another thing that this concept of being cost burdened. So it's 30% of your gross income. Couple things to keep in mind about that. One is that was established in 1969, and that much of our kind of monthly bills have changed substantially since then. And again, that is only for your rent or mortgage. It's not including your utilities as well. Second part of that is 30% of say 30 or 35,000 feels a lot different than 30% of say 70 or 75,000. What you have left over to take care of health insurance, new tires, et cetera, if you're at 30% of 30,000 is pretty darn limited versus at higher percent. And, I think that's important for us to think about who's feeling the pinch in Lander. We know it's our young professionals as well as our older folks and folks on fixed income. So when we think about cost burden, let's please keep that in mind for them. These are the folks who really, after they pay rent, many of our neighbors and constituents are trying to figure out, do I pay for my medicines or do I have just one meal a day? Like that's what it means to be cost burden. And to me, that is a crying shame. And I hope we can really move forward to address that. So another part that I know I am a broken record on, I think we need to be mindful of how our current development does not lend itself well to the long-term repair and upkeep. Again, when we look at what it costs to redo the less than 1 mile of Lincoln, if we extend that out to 52 miles of Lander roads, that's $403 million. Like that is a staggering number to consider for that. And so the idea of having slight increase in density that's being proposed here, well, certainly is not going to make it a one-to-one. But if that's a little bit additional money to offset infrastructure upkeep, that helps, right? If, I'm the only person renting the car, I have to pay the whole thing. But if John rents with me, then we get to share that cost. So I sold the Prius. Sorry, John. You missed your chance, man. But same thing. So if we had smaller lots, so we have a few more homes that are sharing the cost of that street's water main, that helps dissipate the cost for all of that. And again, I bring that up because one of the things we as a council are doing are catching up on these infrastructure needs. We know we have miles of pre-74 water mains that need to be upgraded. There is a place where housing needs and city infrastructure intersect and can be mutually beneficial to each other. is what I'm saying in a long-winded way.
I don't think it's long-winded. And I just wanted to check to see if Councilman Stubble wanted to chime in or if she.
Thanks, Council President Cox. I appreciate the thought and the inclusion. I'll be excited to see where we take this discussion and debate. A few thoughts off the top of my head right now, though. And can you hear me okay?
It might be an our issue, not a your issue.
Okay.
Might
Is
need to
it-
check your output on your Zoom as well.
Can you not hear me at all? Or is this poor to hear me?
We're checking technical difficulties on this end.
Why don't you move on to somebody else and come back to me?
Oh, jeez.
Great.
Julian,
Testing.
that's surviving, but in your Zoom settings, is your speaker set? Oh, now we lost her.
Yep. I have checked my output.
In the re-log in. More than likely. While we're waiting for her, I would also echo Councilmember White's. It's really a fine balance. We don't want to be Jackson. We're not trying to do that. But we do have a housing issue in Lander. We are really struggling to keep young professionals as well. And like you said, it's interesting that the way in which you guys have proposed these changes has been really mindful to that balance. And well done. I mean, I've reviewed it numerous times with Lita, I've reviewed it here, and what you proposed is really walking that fine balance of what's appropriate for Lander, not necessarily what the trends are. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
So another thing I've been somewhat obsessively looking at things like rental prices through Lander Talk, what's available on Zillow, et cetera. And it's pretty astonishing when you just look at it as the monthly rental price. It's a lot easier to say, oh yeah, okay. I mean, sure, we all know prices have gone up. But I see things, $1,000 to $1,200 for, two bed, one bath kind of place. So at $1,200 to not be cost burden, that means you need to be making a minimum of 48,000. And then when you put it into that context and think about, well, that's not a young professional in coming to work in Lander. That's where I think it's important for us to look at what do these rental prices mean? Who's actually able to afford that? And I know for me, this is a personal value, which I realize is not ubiquitous. I think it's important for the health of a community to have young professionals here. I mean, we've seen that our community is aging. This is how we have the workforce to replace us. This is what makes it vibrant, that grows our population, that brings kids to the school, et cetera. So I want to see that Lander can be a place where young professionals can see they can get a toehold. I'm not saying they expect to buy their home when they're 27, but they need to be able to believe that after a few years of work, they can't move into their starter home. And right now, what I'm hearing from a lot of the young professionals who either considered here or are on their way out of here is that's not their reality. And again, I think that's really unfortunate.
That is absolutely accurate. And we're going to turn it back over to Councilmember Stubble. Let's give it another try. Still muted. Yeah, hang on just one second. and then we'll try, and then we'll call it good. Okay. I'm not sure, only so that
Oh, is this now working?
no, it's not working.
So Julia just sent me a text. She's getting an error message that the host has disabled unmuting.
Oh, interesting.
Julia, you can call me on my phone and I can hold it up to the microphone.
I don't think we'll do that, only
I-
for purposes of recording and making sure she would be. So we apologize for the technical difficulties. It is. Try one more time.
Testing,
I think I can read lips. No, just kidding.
testing. It seems like it's working for the Zoom participants, but not the room.
It's still yeah, we're still unable to hear you.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Reed.
Yeah. Oh, interesting, but we can't hear through speakers. Do we have our speakers turned down? By any? Okay. We're not giving up just yet, so hang tight. If other people can hear her.
Good.
Okay, we apologize, Councilmember Stubble. Hopefully, maybe in our next meeting, you'll have some comments to make on your report. That would be excellent. Are there any other comments from council? Thank you. We appreciate your time and being here. It was informative, and also folks that attend council meetings. We appreciate that you're here and paying attention, and we're not a bad group up here. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank
Yeah.
you for having us.
Thank you. We are